Dr. Scrase, thank you for being here, joining us here today on April 19th. It's been quite a bit of time, I guess, since we've seen you. I know we used to do these weekly kind of chats with all the media here, but things have calmed down quite a bit in terms of what we've seen of the presence of COVID in our community. But to ask you first, where are things at right now in terms of mid-April? What is COVID doing in the New Mexico community?
Actually, right now we're doing real well. We talked in, I think, early March, late February, that it looked like we might get a spring break here in New Mexico from COVID, and it seems like we're getting that. Cases are running, 140 to 160 a day. Our threshold from the CDC is 210 cases a day. Actually, that was the old threshold. The new one's like 450 or 500, and so we're doing real well there. Only 45 people in the there were only 41 people in the hospital yesterday with COVID, and only 2 people on a ventilator, which is really a low. You have to go back a couple of years to get that low, and so we're real pleased with the progress. Omicron kind of taking over for Omicron has taken over from Delta, and now Omicron Part 2. BA2 sort of infiltrating the Omicron world of viruses, taking over. But so far, we don't have really hard data that it's more infectious or causes more severe disease, or, we do know it's resistant to our monoclonal antibody, the one that we had left that we were using, sotrovimab. So we stopped using that a couple of weeks ago. But we have new oral therapies that seem to be working as well. And so I think we're in a good place.
You mentioned BA2, that second Omicron variant, kind of the sibling of Omicron. Are vaccines working against BA2?
Vaccines still seem effective in preventing severe disease. So, that the relationship between different variants is important, because Delta came from a completely different strain or part of the family tree of COVID than Alpha did, and Omicron from a completely different part than Delta. And so I think we saw with Omicron that those that were vaccinated got a little bit of protection from getting COVID again, but a lot of protection against hospitalization and death. And so that still seems to be holding up. BA2, again, we're a little early to know about vaccine effectiveness, but early data suggested that it still can actually prevent hospitalizations and deaths, even in some of the new variants.
Boosters have been a big part of the equation, right? And we have seen the messaging go out there over the last few months about those who are older and those who are also immunocompromised, and how it is important for them to get now the equivalent of a second booster.
Right.
So when we look at the total percentage of boosters that is on the state's public dashboard there, I just pulled it up here today as of, which looks like it's being updated a little less regularly than the daily ones over the last couple of years, but as of April 12th, 46.3% of New Mexicans 18 and older had a booster shot. So certainly not as high, I imagine, as you would want to see that number. And it's also been some time, right, since the first booster shots rolled out. So I suppose my question to you is do you have any concern that more people maybe aren't getting boosters right now, or that we're not seeing that number continuing to maybe go up?
Yeah, no, I would love to see more folks boosted. Clear, dramatic difference between just getting the primary series or the primary series plus a booster and hospitalizations and deaths. And so, I just got my second booster, I think 10 days ago, was happy to get it. Really look at vaccines as a way of protecting me from having to end up in the hospital or being a COVID fatality. I think a lot of folks, though, sort of attach the vaccine to more, it will keep me from getting COVID. And as the virus continues to mutate, that isn't exactly the case, but it's certainly preventing severe disease. So I think there are probably a group of people, and some of my friends, well, I got the first 2 shots and then I got COVID, and I figure, why should I bother with the booster? I tell them to bother with the booster. I was seeing patients yesterday. I told all my patients, actually, I was kind of surprised. Most of my patients had already gotten their second booster. So that was exciting. But, my group of patients is 75 and older. They know their risk. They know the importance of preventing hospitalization. And so they're all getting it. But yeah, I think that over time, the more people that get boosted, the more immune we'll all be to COVID. But at the same time, I got to tell you, I just got my 4th shot of a vaccine that was developed for a virus as it existed 2 years ago. And I think the next phase of this really needs to be advancing vaccines to either cover more variants or the newer variants or whatever. I don't know. Do you want me to go on a little bit about that? Because there's a dilemma involved there.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, where are we at with that kind of status of, will we see a different type of COVID vaccine or maybe a version 2.0 out there? And maybe how important is that as part of the conversation of continued protection against the virus?
I know that researchers are working on all sorts of different angles of attacking the virus. And I think that there is research going on now that I'm hoping will bear fruit. But there's a little bit of a trick in developing a vaccine, because if you think about our history, particularly over the past year and a half, we had Alpha a year ago and then Delta 9 months. No, Alpha, sorry. We had Alpha around January of 2021. We had Delta July 2021. We had Omicron in January 2022. And so these major variant shifts seem to be occurring every 6 months. But it takes, 8 to 9 months to bring a vaccine to market. Remember, the first vaccine came out about 9 months after the initial wave of COVID hit the United States. And so if you're a CEO of a pharmaceutical company, there's a little bit of a risk developing a new vaccine that might be a little out of date by the time it finally enters the market. And so it seems like Pfizer and Moderna tend to be right now much more focused on delivering those vaccines to different populations or younger kids, or just giving boosters because they've already done all the development of those and they have them and they can more easily manufacture them. So I think there's a bit of a quandary here with the cycle time of a new virus being 6 months and the time to produce a new vaccine being 9. And then if you add in the time it takes the new variant to get up to full steam, that's another 4 to 6 weeks. And so it's a tough world out there in the free market, pharmaceutical company figuring out how do you make a big investment like that.
Yeah. This is more of a what's going around type question. As our society has kind of gotten back to everything we were used to pre-pandemic, and mask requirements have gone away to include, now in the airports and federal related travel, but we can get to that in a little bit. What is going around more so? Are we seeing more flu, more cold than we are seeing COVID as much? Because I know people out there, certainly some in our newsroom as well, have talked about there is different types of viruses now going on, but not exactly feeling like this is all COVID related.
So 2 things. We're still seeing more of COVID than anything else, but part of the reason for that is we require reporting for COVID, and most everybody's testing for COVID right now. We have a big Influenza A surge going on in New Mexico right now and nationally as well. But, we don't test everybody for influenza. So, that's been my experience as well. I think a lot of folks have Influenza A right now. Still some people getting COVID, more than probably Influenza A. But we know about most of those COVID patients. And then the usual respiratory viruses. This is a little later in the year for Influenza A to be surging in April. Normally we see it more in the winter, but some years it's a little later and it is this year.
Okay. One last question for you. The federal travel related requirements have changed. What would you tell New Mexicans going to the airport, flying on a plane? They're not required to wear a mask now. TSA isn't enforcing that. And I assume those changes will happen on buses and in train stations probably as well. Do you see the state still urging people to wear masks during travel?
Let me start with what I'm going to do. I'm probably going to be wearing a mask and maybe an N95 mask, probably an N95 mask on airplanes for the rest of my life. Many of us have had the experience of going on a plane trip to visit family and coming back home and then having a cold or flu or something afterwards. So I'm probably going to wear a mask forever. And I also think that people who want to avoid getting COVID should do the same. I think, though, that we are in this mode now of transitioning from government responsibility for personal decisions to, and I think appropriately at this point in the pandemic, personal responsibility for personal decisions. So I'm still going to wear some sort of wraparound eye protection and a mask on a plane. I'm going to Chicago next week. We'll be doing that. And, I have a risk factor. I'm older. And so anybody with age over 64, certainly, and anybody with any of those risks, high blood pressure, heart disease, lung disease, on and on, immunosuppression, just should take extra care. I've been talking lately about dressing for the weather, and so you can wear shorts and a t-shirt when it's 90 degrees out. But that won't work when it's 10 below. And the same thing is, what's your tolerance for the cold? And so I dress a little warmer, maybe because of that, to protect myself.
Yeah. Dr. Scrase, thank you. We appreciate it. It sounds like those are personal decisions, but not something the state is getting involved in right now.
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right.